Okay, so we're going to jump back into Unreal here, and we've already kind of set up our jump function. We set up our inputs, we set up our jump, and we set up our sprint. So this video here is just purely kind of like as an additional kind of like stretch goal for people who might be a little bit more comfortable with Unreal. So this is what we have at the minute. So we've got our sprint input, which is do the print string, and then it's setting our sprint to be 1200. Then whenever we let go, it's setting it back to be 600. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add in a thing called a timeline. So we're going to click and drag onto a bit of empty space. Going to add our timeline. I'm going to give it a name, just because quite often you might have 2 or 3 of these. So you'll notice now whenever we hit, it's going to play. And then it's going to update this. So what we need now is we need to add in a track in here. And the way that we do that is we can double click here. And now you notice the timeline opens up in its own separate little event graph. So we've got some options here about what we can do. We can add an event graph, which will call different events as the timeline plays through. We can add a vector track, which will output us like a vector, which we've looked at in previous lectures. Or we can add a float track. So for today's one, I'm just going to add a float track. Okay, so now you get the option to kind of name this track here. So I'm going to set it as walk speed. And again, you don't have to name these, but it's just good practice to get used to doing them. So we need to add some points to this timeline. So at the minute it's set to be a 5-second one. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down shift and I'm going to click on this line. And then I'm going to hold down shift and click on this line again. And what this does is it mixes this point. So you can see now, just because of where I clicked, it set at 0.118 and a whole load of numbers. And its value is 0. So what I want to do is I want to set that as 0. And I want to set the value for this to be 600, because I know that that's our starting speed. Okay. Now straight away that'll dart off screen. So we want to be able to view it so we can fit horizontally and we can fit vertically. So now you can see there's where our timeline starts. It's at 600, and then this is our next kind of keyframe, and we want to set this to be the end of this. So this is going to be 5 seconds, and then we can get a value of 1200. So now you can see what happened is when this plays through this timeline, it's going to start at 0 and it's going to slowly rise up. Now, looking at this, I'm thinking 5 seconds is pretty long for that sprint to take place. So we're going to modify this. So we're going to change our timeline to be 2 seconds. And now I'm going to have to change this frame to be 2 seconds as well. So click on the frame so it's selected. Change the time to 2 and hit enter. So now you can see this is what's going to happen. So I'm just going to compile that. And we're going to pop back in here. So now rather than us setting this to be 1200, I'm going to plug this in here. So what's going to happen when it updates this timeline, when it plays, it's going to set this walk speed gradually as that timeline goes through. And there's a way we can check this. So we're going to do a print string. I'm going to plug this straight in here. So now if we hit play, we'll move around as normal. I'm going to give myself a little bit of running space. So you notice here what happened is it did it once, but it didn't do it again. So what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect this and we're going to set it to play from start. So that means every time I sprint, it'll start at the very beginning of the timeline. So I'm just going to get over this jump to begin with. It's a bit of a nuisance. There we go. So you can see my speed going up. I'm at max speed. My speed goes back down. Gradually speeding up. Max speed. Let go. I stop sprinting. So that works fine. So what we could do is we can actually say that, you know what, after the end of this, we just want to set it back to be normal anyway. So once that timeline finishes, we actually want you to just go back to being 600. So that would be like a real quick burst. So what I've done here is on this node, update is every time it plays through, but like so every frame as it plays through. Finished is whenever your timeline completes, you can ask it to complete some different tasks. And just to be safe here, we'll just duplicate this as well, and we'll plug it in so we can see this now. So we hit compile and we go play. I'm just going to get over this awkward jump. There we go. Right. And then we're back down to normal. Now, another thing you probably noticed is if I let go, it's still keeping the same speed. So what we want to do is we can wire this up that whenever I release, it can stop this as well. So it'll stop playing the timeline, and then whenever that's finished, it'll go down. Okay, so that's just a real quick introduction to timelines, how we can use them to kind of set up like different events. We're going to use timelines like quite a lot, but this is a very, very quick introduction to them. So obviously now the next thing to do is we can clean up and we can kind of remove these print strings. But that should give you everything that you need to complete the tasks that are already set in this week's task list. So the last thing that we wanted to do was set up a box that when we enter it, it modifies the player speed. So kind of like a booster, kind of like a pickup. So I'll be doing that in the next video tutorial. And then after that, we'll be going on to how to record videos and where you can upload them onto Blackboard.